we go. We are recording. And if you have any questions that you don't feel like jumping in verbally, you can always type them into the chat window. Today, I've invited Nancy, and we have Thomas, who is just as good. If not, I don't know. They're equally awesome. So they come from the ALC Mosaic in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we also have invited Anthony, who says he's coming, but perhaps got lost on the way somehow. And it's a little hard to check my messages to see if he's frantically trying to reach me, but I might check with him later. And so we're going to talk about the concept of self-directed education, the Agile Learning Center model, and our plans in Gainesville to start a self-directed learning center. So I want to start by asking Thomas to give a brief introduction of who he is and why I think he's a good person to talk to everybody tonight.
Wait, I have to say why I think you think I'm a good person to talk to?
Well, I think it will be revealed. Just, you know, give the regular spiel. Who are you?
Like who I am and what I, okay.
What brought you to this place to be invited today?
Oh, okay, well that's a long, that might be
okay. Condensed version.
I'll start and you tell me if I'm off course.
Okay.
So can I just also get a sense of the folks that are on this call are either people who are kind of bought into doing Thrive Hive with you, or are thinking about it, or somewhere like interested on some level, or like what? Who
I can tell you of the people that I know that are connected right now. One is somebody who wants to be a facilitator, is very much on board with the concept of self-directed education. She's actually going to be starting her own forest school in Gainesville as well.
Actually,
and
you want to? Could we just do
intros? Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'll do the last one, and then I can just kind of talk a little bit longer from there.
Okay. So, Kristen, do you want to start by unmuting yourself and telling us who you are and where you're at in your thoughts on self-directed education, and then a little bit about your project?
Okay. Yes. Hi, everyone. Yes, I am 100% on board. Excited to be a facilitator. I actually visited the ALC in the city with my kids, and got to get the feel of the place and the concept, and it was really awesome. And I kind of picked their brains while I was there for a couple hours. Yeah. And I recently went to Washington and did a forest school training, so I'm kind of going to do that 2 days, and then hopefully be at the Thrive Hive with my kids at least 2 to 3 days a week. So yeah, we'll be moving back from Vermont next month. So I think that's it.
Who is interested in going next? Just unmute yourself and introduce yourself briefly. Or type something about yourself if you don't want to speak.
Hey, this is Nancy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, cool. I am a parent to a little wild 4-year-old, and we are interested in homeschooling, but not necessarily just the traditional homeschooling. We're not sure. And I know originally I've been following you guys for about a year. I know initially the ages were 4 to 18, and now I see that it's age 5 to 18. So I jumped on just to see if I could get some more information, if this is something we need to wait to do, or, you know, where it's going and that sort of stuff.
Thank you. Anybody else? V20, Naomi, 352. yada yada. Oh, is that Nancy? Somebody is unmuted and has a number. I'm not sure. They're on the phone right now. Anyway, okay, someone left, and I do know Naomi. She's been doing unschooling for a long time, so she has a voice.
I have a voice. Yeah, we've always unschooled, and my older daughter already kind of aged out of this. She's dual enrolled. She's 18. And my younger daughter is 14, so I guess she'd be a prime candidate.
Yes, and she has her own opinions about it. She may or may not want to participate, but we're hoping to make an environment that she wants to be in. She's an awesome young lady. I think that's it of the people who look like they're going to, oh, there's some people waiting. Hi, welcome, Cassandra and Melanie. We are just doing introductions. I know you just got here, but if you would like to say who you are, Tomis is our guest in the yellow shirt. He's going to introduce himself after we get a little feel from everybody who's here where they're at in the spectrum of awareness of self-directed education and their interest in it. If anyone wants to jump in. I see Melanie does not have a microphone. Maybe she's not able to do that. And Cassandra, do you want to say anything? Or you can type it into the chat window. But maybe we'll just head on to Tomis.
Did Cassandra go?
She's still here. I invited her to say something. But
Cassandra, can you hear us?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
yay, yes.
Okay. So I have a little sick baby who's crying. So, and also I was trying to figure it out. But anyway, we are interested. We have a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old, soon to be 10-year-old. And we're interested in learning more. Basically, we're not necessarily gonna do it, but we're very interested.
Okay. Well, if Melanie or 352-575-7350 is able to pop in and interrupt me and do an intro at any point, well, I scared her away. I'm sorry, Melanie. You don't have.
I think that it didn't appear that she had a microphone option, so maybe they cannot say anything.
Okay, well, I'm gonna keep my intro, try to keep it fairly brief because I feel like it sounds like the group here is maybe barring Cassandra, I'm not sure, but it sounds like everyone is at least fairly familiar with self-directed education and unschooling and already kind of on board or participating in some sort of way. So rather than go down that whole path, I can just share a little bit about myself, and then if there are specific questions that people have for either Talia about the program, which it sounds like there might be, or for me about anything that I can speak to from experience, I'm happy to answer those. So my name's Tomis, and I have been working in self-directed education for about, almost 10 years now. And I got into the work because I became passionate about this idea of figuring out what's possible, seeing what's possible in the world when we stop kind of trying to train kids to fit into the world that we have, and instead set up environments that trust them to create a different one. And So for me, that my interest in the work really came from like a kind of a big picture social change perspective. And then the more I learned about children and child development and psychology and all those kinds of things, the more all the other kind of micro details just made sense as well. So for the first few years of my time doing this work, I worked in New York City with a free school startup called Manhattan Free School, and learned a lot. And then that school was basically on the verge of closing, which created an opportunity for the first Agile Learning Center to come into being. And I worked with some awesome people to make that happen, and was the director of that school for 3 years. And then through that time, I met my wife, Nancy, who started the Mosaic school down here in Charlotte, and started collaborating with her. And the Mosaic school quickly became ALC Mosaic. And then we started doing trainings and kind of cohering this network. And a big part of the vision for Agile Learning Centers from the beginning was to kind of open source the model that we had, and at the same time create a community of facilitators who were doing the work. So for two reasons, mostly so that those people doing the work had others to draw experience from, share resources with, get support, collaborate, and kind of feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself, and that you're not the only person on the planet doing this. And the other part of it is that the ALC model has always been intended to be emergent and evolving, rather than kind of just write down a bunch of ideas and then for the next 100 years have people try to replicate them over and over again. The goal of this model is really that it's a living model, and there are 4 basic root assumptions to the model that you can read on agilelearningcenters.org. And then there's a bunch of principles that kind of help guide those roots. But from there, how it looks and the tools that we use and kind of the way that it takes shape is really meant to change and evolve over time based on what people have found to work. And also because the world is changing, and what works 10 years ago might not work now and won't work in 10 years, in terms of how we set up spaces and how we, the tools that we use to kind of unleash the learning potential that we all have, and for creating a healthy culture for living together and collaborating together, and figuring out how to kind of work amidst all of the differences that we have, that we bring into a community, and as people living in 2018. So for the past 3 years, 4 years, I've been 3 years, I guess, but down here at ALC Mosaic, and and we have about 70 students going into the school year, ranging from ages 2 or 3 to 15. And I'll stop there. There's other things I could say, but probably not important. So I'll wait to see if there's any questions people have that I could be of service.
I did forget to introduce myself, more than just my name. And since this is being recorded, this is going to be helpful to people who may be further off on the spectrum when they view it later and see what we're talking about tonight. So I don't quite know where I fell into this, but it seemed like it just snowballed with natural childbirth somehow, turned into attachment parenting and looking for alternatives, and not wanting to send my child to a school or be away from me at before he was 4 or whatever it was, and thinking about homeschooling. And I think I learned about unschooling at that point, I kept going deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole. Like, what else is here? What is the truth? And wanting to be the best parent, I think a lot of people search for that perfect parenting model, to follow, and maybe they change from year to year, or every few years they discover something new if they're continually searching. But the idea of self-directed education, though it seems radical compared to for some people, it really kind of comes out of a sense of looking for the best way, looking for the best way that my child can learn, and knowing that my child is an individual, and that sending them to a place where they're all learning the same thing didn't seem to make sense to me. And I have big ideas. I wish I had done what Tomis did and started this network. It's kind of like I wanted to just take over the world, and you have big ideas. As well. I would love it if we just wiped away all the crazy forced education stuff that goes on, and had a different model take hold. But it is very difficult to start these schools, and what the Agile Learning Network has done, I'm going to admit someone named me, myself, an iPhone, so here we go. So what the Agile Learning Network has done is, like he said, allowed people to work together to not have to reinvent the wheel every single time we want to start one of these crazy things out in the middle of nowhere where nobody has experienced anything like it. We feel less crazy, like he said, and there are people who've started democratic schools and other kinds of free schools, and some of them come and go, and possibly because they didn't have a lot of support outside of their community and even within their community. So I've been working on this partly with Kristen and another woman named Gwen, and some other folks in Gainesville who are very passionate about it. For the last 3 or 4 years, I've been looking for a space, and I've finally found a space, and now I want to welcome all the children to experience what this kind of education has to offer. So I'm going to admit that person again. And what I'd like to do now is see if I'm having trouble. If anybody has any questions for either of us.
Talia?
Yes.
I have one. I'm really interested in the fact that the Mosaic offers the younger children. As young as 2 years old. I'd love to hear like the challenges, Tomis, of having the younger kids, and then maybe Talia, what your thoughts are on going, or even like Nancy mentioned, even just going to 4, like kind of hearing both sides of that and thoughts on it.
You want me to talk about Mosaic's situation?
Yeah, especially how it works with the younger kids.
Yeah, so actually Mosaic's kind of been a bit of a pioneer in that regard. When we started the ALC in New York, we actually only really enrolled students 7 and up, because the initial kind of model or initial tools and practices that we had kind of put in place and put forth as kind of the ALC model at that first year, at least, were about intention setting for the day, and about kind of weekly planning as a community, and about culture building and agreement making as a community as well. And there's also some like processes of like light documentation. And so that we kind of knew from those of us who were doing this that had experience with kids in this setting that a lot of that stuff wasn't going to really be effective with 4, 5, and 6-year-olds. When you have most 4, 5, and 6-year-olds, and this isn't always the case, there's definitely not a clear age line, but there is a developmental shift that happens around the idea of kind of like having the planfulness drive or ability. But most younger kids, on a Monday don't really want to sit through a meeting or aren't really going to say, like, I want to play, I want to build a city in the sandbox on Wednesday at 10:30. They kind of are living in a spontaneous world where they're just soaking it all in at all times, and they're just sponges. And so the idea for them of like tomorrow even, or in 2 days, or, next week is like not really something that they are fully grasping. And so the initial kind of model didn't really work for that. Then when I started working with Mosaic, Nancy, my wife, who started the school, also had her main experiences with middle school kids, and that's who she was kind of working with. However, she was convinced by some of the founding parents to enroll their 5-year-olds at the school. And those kids, for the first year, it was a struggle for her because she was more geared towards supporting kids that were, 8, 9, 10, 11. And those kids would run around and play outside and make a big mess and kind of do their own thing, which was really okay for them, but it was hard for her to really figure out how to serve them and how to kind of manage both sets of needs, or at least this kind of developmental distinction. So after the first year at Mosaic, a parent who's now a director of the school, Lacey Manship, had always kind of wanted to start a pre-K. She had experience working with younger kids and was teaching at the university at that time. And she basically was like, hey, can I start can I do a pre-K program at the school? So it kind of fell into our lap, and she's, couldn't be a more perfect person for the role. And so we actually were separated at different campuses for 3 years. And she ran what we call the Roots program at our original location while we moved some of the older kids to a different location. And it wasn't until this past year that we finally started the year at this property that we spent a long time buying and preparing to be a school, where we're now all together. But there's still kind of this distinction between the groups, where the kids that are in Roots don't start their day setting intentions, though there is spaces in their indoor space where they can write intentions down, and there are times where they can share specific interests they have with the facilitators. But it's kind of more just like they get there and they start playing, and they have a much lighter weight process where there'll be one circle meeting they have a day, and it happens kind of whenever it feels right for it to happen. And they have one kind of themed offering that's presented to them that's optional every day. But there's no set the week meeting like we do with the older kids in what we call the branches group, where we basically plan out offerings for the whole week and field trip logistics and signups for different things, and kind of activate that planfulness drive that older kids have. And so we're still kind of working through the transition process. We put in place a process this year for kids that are at Roots that want to move on, kind of transition to branches, and what that looks like. But there is still a very distinction between the two groups, because the kind of scaffolding and support, what it looks like to support without interfering, which is really what we're trying to do as facilitators, is different for 4 and 5-year-olds than for 7, 8, 9, 10, and certainly 15-year-olds. So that's the gist of it. If there's more you want me to say about that, I can answer specific questions.
Yeah, that's good. I'm going to read after the call. I found the Roots section on your webpage, so I'll read more on it there as well. I was just curious, if you had them together or if it felt very separate.
Well, on campus, it's everyone's on the same campus, and there's a lot of mixing that goes on. But like once the day gets going, there are. You'll see 13 and 14-year-olds playing with 5 and 6-year-olds. Like they're all free to kind of intermix, throughout the day. There's a student agreement and certain requirements and responsibilities and extra privileges that come with being in the branches group that the younger kids, we're not asking them to sit through meetings. We're not asking them to document, share what they did that day and have it kind of recorded in any kind of way. So certain things like that, that are different, but when it comes to existing together, the age mixing is fairly fluid.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you.
So I had a question from somebody who is not able to share it here. And the question or the concern is her child is going through an awkward age and she's not sure if this community is a good fit. I mean, there's not much to know about it yet because we haven't formed, but she wants to be alone and at home, and her mom doesn't like it, but she's not sure if it's fair to go against her wishes either, to send her. And she said her daughter's quite stubborn, and she talks about introversion and anxiety, and she's not sure how being in a group would serve her at this time. And I'm gonna let Thomas think about that too. I do know that there are agreements that are signed before you join a community like this that say that you are joining of your own free will. So we wouldn't want someone to join if they were being forced to do it. At least in the beginning they wanted to be there. So there is the opportunity in most schools like this to have a visiting week and to experience the community without making a commitment to be there. It looks like Cassandra's microphone is going on and off, but so the thing of kids like this, I'm going to say that maybe they should wait until we've started, or so that there is something to experience as opposed to just being dumped into a bunch of fresh kids all trying to figure it out. I don't know. And then experience a visiting week and see how they feel about it, and come back to them again and say, do you want this? And is this something you want to try longer and for the whole year, or however you can pull out if you give us a month's notice. But I do understand anxiety is really tricky. You don't really want to do anything that doesn't feel good, but you also want to do it at the same time sometimes. So here, Thomas, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah. Do you know if it's the parent asking this question, or if it's the young person asking this question?
The parent is asking the question.
So we're not sure if the young person has a particular opinion about whether or not they're we don't know if the young person actually wants to try it out, is interested in trying it out, or if the parent is kind of asking them to.
Yeah, I mean, it's so new. I do know this person, and I've described what it's supposed to be, and there was some interest, and as long as the child said, as long as they could do that, there's a thing that they like to do, as long as they could do that thing there, they mentioned that they might try it,
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could certainly wait until things are a little more established, though. That's a moving goalpost in terms of being established. It might feel like it takes 3 years to get established, but after 3 months you'll feel more established than you did the first week. So that's a little tricky to say okay, I think we're ready for you to try it out. I mean, it could be that she tries it right away and then says, let me wait and try it again in 6 months or a year. But yeah, definitely a visiting week is a key part of our enrollment process has always been a key part of the enrollment process for schools that I've helped manage and develop. And yeah, so it's a tricky thing. Like you're trying to balance autonomy and collaboration and alignment. So kids have 90% or more of their days to spend how they want as individuals. But so this person could be an introvert with some anxiety that can kind of, as long as there's a space where they can feel relatively at ease, as long as the space allows them, whether it's quiet or certain resources, whatever their needs are, if those are there, then for most of the day, they may feel good about being there. But at the same time, there's, you are joining a community and you are figuring out how to be together and how to get along with and manage different people with different personalities and different backgrounds. And I think that's one of the most, if not the most important educative skill that's being developed in this environment, because you're given time, everyone has time. And so there's lots of talking, there's lots of conversation, there's lots of, quote unquote conflicts that you get better and better at managing and not having turn into conflicts, the more you live together and the more you figure out how to be in relationship with people. And so people have, different spectrums of, introversion and extroversion, you could call it, or, excitement from being in a relationship with people versus that draining you. But at the end of the day, I think on a pretty basic human level, we derive a fair amount of meaning from our relationships, and if not the most meaning from our relationships. And so learning who you are, in the sense that who you are in relationship with other people and how you can have your needs met and how you can also meet others' needs and be in a relationship with other people is crucial to living a fulfilled life on some very basic level. So yeah, it does depend. I mean, we say there are a lot of unschoolers that might come around and say, hey, our kids are interested. If they're used to being at home and kind of having, not really having to be in a community, then it might not actually be a good fit if they're not interested in that. And if they're not actually interested in that, some of the challenges that come with that, because that is what ALCs are. And so that is an important distinction to put on the table and to kind of make sure is being considered when you're talking about a situation like this one.
I have another question from somebody who can't get the chat to work. They messaged me, and it is, will watching TV media be an option at Thrive Hive? And my answer is yes, it'll be an option. And to many people, I think that for especially younger kids and parents who have younger kids who maybe have been through maybe a Waldorf education or other kinds of screen-free preferences that they have at home, that can be kind of scary. I just wanted to put that out there because until you have a 14-year-old and a 5-year-old who are trying to like watch media together, you go, it's really tricky. At my house, that's what it is, 14 and 5-year-olds. So how do you balance their needs and interests? But there's frequently asked questions on the Agile Learning Center website, and it addresses video games, I think. Is that right? It says, what if my child wants to just play video games all day long? And it says, what if? They might improve their reading and spelling skills. There's some things that they might learn from videos, but if you don't want any videos at all, ever, that might not work here because there's going to be different kinds of learning from those kinds of media. And if there's a limit, we just had a discussion, a little discussion in a Slack group amongst the Agile Learning Facilitators, where someone asked about that. And Anthony, was supposed to be here, he mentioned that at his ALC, they have a limit on binge watching and binge gaming that goes beyond like a total of like 2 hours a day, which can happen when kids have their own devices. And I think he recommends to parents, if they don't want that to happen, don't send your kid with a device. There'll be, shared computers in the space, but they are shared, and you can't just sit there and like watch whatever you want. And you also will learn as a part of a community respect for what other people at different ages and temperaments can handle in your space. I would love for Tomis to share the real experience that he has with media at the various schools he's been through, because just me talking about what we're going to do isn't necessarily going to allay people's fears, perhaps.
Yeah, do we know if the person that asked us on the call right now?
Yes.
Yeah, actually, I can speak now. I just couldn't get in because my baby was crying, but he's not anymore. My concern was or is time, rather than content. My kids do watch media, and we don't really limit it at home, but it just doesn't. I don't know how it feels. I guess I'm exploring how it feels to me to send, to send them and have them have unfettered, unlimited TV watching at a place where they're going for the day. I guess that's my concern, is more time than content.
Yeah. So I guess there's a couple of different ways of talking about it. I think that the very baseline for me, the conversation is about partnership and being in partnership with kids, which means doing our work as adults to suspend immediate judgments that we have, and really all judgments, and to kind of look closely at the fears that we might hold as well. I say that because I think there's a lot of cases where I see parents either prohibiting completely or significantly limiting kids' access to technology, to video games or computers, in cases where they have interests that are legitimate. They're just foreign to the adult, or they represent some sort of kind of anxiety or fear that we're carrying that may not actually be useful. That may be kind of a story that we brought into the situation. And then there's other cases where you're in a relationship with your kid, and the deeper your partnership is, and the deeper you're learning to kind of build a mutual respect with your child, the more you get to know them in a way that they feel respected. And then you can kind of see, like what's really going on for them. So, there are cases, I think, where any human is kind of like, if the concern is really like, oh, my kid is just doing this all the time. If you really feel like, whether it's video games or for some kids, it might, it used to be like bookworms, just reading books constantly and shutting the world out. And like, my parents are going through a divorce, so all I want to do is sit in my room and read fantasy stories. Or my best friend is mad at me at school, so I don't want to face it. I just want to read books. Like it doesn't really, in a lot of cases, it's not the thing that they're doing, it's the underlying issue. And you only really know the difference between if there's an underlying issue or if this is just something that they're actually really, really interested and passionate about, unless you're in relationship with them. So the first thing is to kind of suspend your judgment and figure out like what's really going on for them. Like, do they really have a deep interest? Like, what is their interest in the thing that they're spending a lot of time on? What about it do they love? And what are they learning? And in a lot of cases, I see parents very quickly going to the fear-based place without spending the time to actually maybe sit down and play the video game with them or watch the YouTube channel with them and ask them questions about it and try to actually like engage your curiosity about why they're interested. And when you do that, you often find that, they have a lot going on, and they actually are learning a lot. And for a lot of people who grew up, in an unschooled environment, playing a lot of video games, or even people who didn't, but were, allowed to play them in certain times, that what they've learned or the skills or the experience of that translated into other, being a foundation for other interests later in life. And so, and also just like, I think the underlying fear is like, well, if my kid just only plays video games, they're going to miss out on all these other important things. And then they're not going to have any of these other experiences that they're going to need later in life. And they're just going to wind up being like, they're not going to know how to do anything else or enjoy anything else. And they're just going to always default to like being in front of a screen. And then they're going to be a young adult that just wants to sit in my basement and play video games. And they're never going to like actually, and I think that, for that to happen, you have to go pretty far down the path of not being in relationship with them and not really knowing what's going on for them. And if you are, otherwise you'll discover that they're really just deeply engaged in something, and practicing being that engaged in something can translate into being deeply engaged in other things later. That happens a lot. So there's not an easy answer to this question, but for me, it always kind of starts with like figuring out what trust and partnership looks like with your kid. We do have situations where, parents make agreements with their kids about how they're going, like how much or how they're going to use screens at school. It's not necessarily the path that I would or plan to go as with my son as he gets older. And unless I'm in a conversation with him where he's saying to me, I've been obsessed with this thing, and my like deep interest in this is like creating a obstacle for me to do these other things with my friends that I really want to do. And I need your help, Dad, to like make sure that I like do these other things that I actually want to do, because the video game is just so, calling me is just so enticing. Like, can you help me? Then I would certainly like, okay, well, let's talk about that. Like, how could we, like, what could we do? Let's make an agreement, or maybe you could set an alarm on your phone, or maybe I could text you at this time. Like, if they're asking for your support, but you only kind of figure that out unless you're in dialogue with them and you're really kind of talking it through with them. So I also think, this is a super long answer, I also think that being transparent with them about what you're thinking and feeling, while also being careful not to put make your fears their problem, is really important. And that's an art, but to let them know, I start to feel a bit anxious or concerned when I see that you're playing this game for 4 straight hours. Like, can you talk to me about what is going on for you when like that makes it so that you need to play the game for so long and so much? And then just learn more about that with them and find out, like, is it a crutch? Is it something that they just like need a little help getting a break from? Or are they actually just any adult doing a creative thing, like, we're kind of wired to go deep into something for a really long time. I mean, I'm 31. When I was a teenager, and even in college, like, there were times where whether it was video games or recording music for fun, like, there's things where I'd stay up all night for 2 days doing the same thing, like working on the same thing, whether it was beating a level or recording a song or working on some other kind of project. Like, that happens. Like, we need the time and space to go deep into things. And so it's not always bad. My friend Akila Richards said this at our training a couple weeks ago, which is, I think, a really brilliant way of putting it, that sometimes the term balance can be really toxic when in talking about the context of self-directed education, because often we need to go really far to one side when we're into something and learning something to get what it is we're trying to get out of it. And the idea of like always having balance can actually really be hurtful. But you only really know how to help your kid unless you're in conversation with them from a place of partnership.
And that makes all of that makes a lot of sense. I guess in the school context or the Thrive Hive context, is that something the facilitators do then? If the kids are watching TV, I mean, honestly, I think the passive watching is different than video game playing, to me anyway. And I just wonder what is the facilitator doing? If the kids are interested in lots of media.
When you say TV, I mean, we certainly, like, I don't own a TV myself, and we don't, at the school, we don't have like a flat screen on the wall with, like cable TV hooked up to it. There are computers with the internet, which I guess is like, depending on what you're looking for, could be it could be super valuable or super toxic. Like you could find a bunch of, you can find what's on TV on the internet. But typically the way TV is, like, it's this very closed thing. It's like there's 80 channels and they're all corporately managed and run. And it's just like, the idea is to flip it on and like have your mind kind of controlled in one place. The internet is getting more and more run in similar ways, and content's being more and more curated for you. And so there's particular dangers in kind of becoming super passive that way. I mean, I know I go to YouTube and it's like all these recommended videos for me. I'm like, oh, wow, I actually want to watch 5 of those right now and not do the thing I came here to do. So you do have to be, kind of navigate that. But the internet's also still fairly open so that you can find all kinds of other things. So we don't have a TV with cable on the wall is one thing. So setting up the space a particular way is different. But I think the difference between like knowing, like Talia mentioned, Anthony had talked about they have a limit on binge watching. I don't know how you know what binge watching is versus not, unless you're in dialogue with the student. To me, it's not about a certain amount of time. You can watch a movie or documentary and be super engaged in thinking about all kinds of things and really deeply learning about stuff, and watch, it could be a show that has 10 episodes that are an hour long, and watch them all and be thinking deeply and engaged and learning a lot, and then Googling a bunch and learning about things you heard and listen, and then that sparks another interest. That's very active. Or you can just be like, oh, I'm going to watch, reruns of Friends for 6 hours tonight. Like that's very passive. So again, you don't know the distinction unless you're in conversation with your kids. So I guess I would just say, like, that's the first place to start. In our context at ALC, like the facilitators are giving kids space, and then when we notice patterns, we're having conversations with them. And so if we feel like a kid is kind of checked out, like, you can figure that out pretty quickly. It doesn't really matter if it's a screen or something else that they're doing. And then we're just trying to figure out, why are they checked out? Like maybe there's something going on behind the scenes. Maybe there's a conflict with friends at school. Maybe it's just one of those lulls in their life where they don't feel like particularly creatively inspired by anything, and they just need to like be entertained and checked out for a couple of weeks. Like, I have phases like that where it's like, I'm just like, actually don't feel like doing any of the creative work that I was super passionate about doing last month. And I'm just going to, give myself a break. So Kids have that too, I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some really powerful things, I think, that the kids will learn that we adults maybe didn't even get when we were growing up, and maybe are falling into now with social media and YouTube and all the media that we can, as adults, have free reign. We have the freedom to do all these things and spend too much time on all those things, and look down at our phones when we're talking to somebody, and I think one of the things that comes to my mind is the idea of intention setting. At the ALC, I think that a lot of us probably don't wake up in the morning and say, my intention today is to spend mind-numbing hours on Facebook clicking and clicking and clicking and not, forgetting what I came here for. And, that is probably not our intention. And kids probably won't have that intention either. Like there's a meeting and they have these spawn groups and spawn, is that what it's called? Groups. And they will talk about their intention for the day, and there'll be different ALCs will do it in a different way, and we'll do it in our own way at our ALC. But setting intentions, having a facilitator and a member talk about what their intention is, it's probably not going to be, I just want to do this random clicking on YouTube for 2 hours. It'll probably be, I want to learn about or I want to do a specific thing with somebody, or I want to finish that project, or whatever it is. So when we come back and we reflect and say, how did it go today? Well, I said I wanted to learn about space travel, but I ended up looking at, crash videos of like bicycles or something. And it was just like, okay, well, that reflection makes them realize that they kind of got lost in that, and maybe they need some help. Do you need some support to help to stay focused on your intention tomorrow, or whatever it is? And the kid can say yes or no, or I think I've got it, I learned my lesson, or whatever, and we see what happens the next day. And over through that iteration, we keep becoming more aware. We facilitators will also have intentions. We may get lost on our phones too, and they will see us doing the same thing of reflecting and saying, gosh, I didn't really get done what I planned to do today. I'm sure that they'll kind of feel that feeling of, I sort of maybe wasted my day, and improve and grow. So letting them kind of fail forward, they can improve.
Yeah, there's so much truth in what Talia is just saying. I mean, I think that that's a huge part of our environment is when you can kind of operate from a place of trust and partnership, then failure can actually be an exciting thing to witness as a facilitator and as a person that's trying to provide support in the space, because it's now an opportunity for figuring out what's next and how to move forward, rather than an alarm for like, got to bring down the hammer and bring in the constraints and straighten this kid out. I alluded to it before, but one of the maxims that we use, we talk about a lot as facilitators in this space is, figuring out what it looks like to provide maximum support with minimal interference. And I think I think about these situations, often as another individual, like what would it look like to get support for myself in a situation of like using screens or technology in a way that wasn't healthy for me. It certainly wouldn't look like having someone come over my shoulder at the end of the day and like yapping at me about it, or judging me for it, or telling me all the ways in which I was, making bad choices. Like that would actually feel oppressive, and I would be like, I'm an adult, get away, so kids are going to do the same thing. And we forget that they're actually people, they're just younger people. So kind of asking yourself, like, what would support look like? And, like exactly like what Talia is saying about the intentions and reflections. I remember very, very clear memory from the first year of ALC in New York. One of the youngest students, a 7-year-old, said in the morning that his intentions one day were to play Minecraft, to go to math club, which was like people coming together to do different various levels of math on Khan Academy or something, and to go to the park. And at the end of the day, when we were reflecting, he said, today I pretty much played Minecraft all day. and I forgot to go to math club and go to the park. And I'm especially bummed that I didn't go to the park because I really love climbing on the big rock. And then he said, Ryan, who is kind of the main facilitator, my friend Ryan, like, would you remind me tomorrow when it's time for park trip and like remind me that I really like going on the big rock. And I was, and it was like, okay, like my job is done here. Like that's exactly what maximum support and minimal interference looks like to me. And that's the kind of self-awareness that we're trying to create through partnership, and the skill that the kid picked up in like being aware, identifying his needs, and then asking for support. It was like the complete picture of most adults can't do that. So that's kind of the goal for me. And if going through a period of like binge playing a video game or something like that is what it takes to learn that skill, then that's well worth it in my opinion.
Yeah, so many adults these days are hiring life coaches just to fix those things. But all these kids get to have a community of life coaches. I mean, we didn't even touch on the fact that in the community, the other learners beyond the facilitators will help shape the culture. And, you know, your friend is saying, hey, get off the computer. I want to do this with you. You know, you're going to listen to them in maybe a different way than a mom saying, get off the computer. You're going to say, oh, cool. Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, there's people here, right? You know, I want to play with them. And then there's also the culture, the change up meeting. Maybe something is brought up where, you know, students say, it's really a bummer that everybody's just like zoned out on, you know, My Little Pony all day or something, and we can't, you know, nobody's there to do anything with or play with and do these projects that we've wanted to do. You know, what do you say we kind of like turn off the Wi-Fi after 12 or something and see how that goes, or the internet, unplug it and see for a week, you know, we have like internet free time, and so, and then everyone votes on it and says, yeah, that's a good idea, you know, or let's try it, and we try it and see how people like it, or it kind of gets people out of the habit of falling into certain patterns, but they try it for a week and see how it goes. Those kind of things. So that's the whole community is also, I know that they're all kids. There's a lot of kids who want to do things that are not on screens, though some kids fall into a more addictive kind of way with screens. Some are like have no interest at all. They're just like, what? You know, they're over here and they're going to be doing other things that in that space, and kids will notice, hey, there's other stuff going on. I don't need to do that. And I think that my kids in particular spend time on screens because when there aren't other friends around. And so when there are other friends around, they're like, I don't need that. I got friends. We're going to do all kinds of things. So that's just my extra. And we're coming to an hour in of talking about this. Are there any particular questions that you have, maybe about the Thrive Hive, or should I tell you what's going on, the latest updates? Or would you like to just head off to bed at 8:30 and go binge watch Friends or something before you?
It's challenging. I can't see anyone else's face.
Naomi has unmuted herself.
I have. I really do want to head off to bed, but I'm going to ask anyway. So if parents are looking to volunteer, like there is a whole lot of jargon there. Like, how do you get trained up and be on board with all of these really neat sounding processes?
You're right. I did throw in some words I didn't explain, and probably Thomas too, but
no, I think they seem self-explanatory. It's just the processes of like how to learn all that. Like that all sounds really cool, and I'm on board, but like I wouldn't know to do that. Like, how do you learn all that?
Right. So I went with another family up to North Carolina last summer for a training to become an Agile Learning Facilitator. Can you see my shirt? Yay. ALF. And you're like, what is she doing? What is she doing? Okay, no. So I spent like 2 weeks or so. I was it 2 weeks. It's a blur now, but I spent the maximum amount of time there possible. I experienced a camp, an ALC camp, and we created our own kind of ALC as adults and created offerings and intentions and all sorts of wonderful things. And we had our kids there. It was great fun, but not everybody has the opportunity to take off and go to North Carolina or Atlanta or wherever they're being held next. But there are materials that I can share that explain a lot of these processes. And there are, if you want to be a volunteer or a facilitator, you can join in on, there's calls, Zoom meetings like this every Monday, where you talk to other people who are doing this and have experience like Tomis. Ask questions, say, this thing came up and I had no idea what to do with it, or can you explain this thing? And there's also just everybody in the network themselves is willing to help to the max. And there's a Facebook group. So there's lots of different ways. I had planned to help my facilitators for the Thrive Hive to become more acquainted with it by using a combination of written materials that they read as well as some Zoom meetings with people, because they haven't yet been able to go and get trained fully.
Is there a cost for that 2-week training?
So I'll put the link in the chat, and if you can get that, or Talia can send it to you if you can't later. That on that page lists all the Agile Learning Facilitator training location and dates for 2018. A bunch of them have already passed. Most of them have. They're actually, I guess the next, there's one in Philly. I didn't know if the one in Philly is going to be open to people outside of their community or not. I guess it is because it's on our website.
Like 3 days.
But that starts in like 3 days. So, or you can go to Puerto Escondido, Mexico in September. But next summer, this summer, as you can see, from April until September, there's about 13 of them, which is pretty astounding. We used to just have one. As of 3 years ago, we only had one. And so next year there'll be a bunch more as well in the States and around the world. And usually the dates for those start coming out around February. And we'll probably continue to roll out through May or June for some of the ones that are organized a little later.
Yeah, you can see that there is a cost, and we paid for our own housing, and I think that I requested some different price than was listed. I think that maybe I was granted some different price, but parents do participate in these, and especially in Charlotte, there were a number of parents that weren't necessarily facilitators that really wanted to dive deeper into the processes, because many people actually use the ALC model at home with their kids. And I know that Carrie Shin, who went with us to Charlotte, she uses some of these things at home, and the intention setting and with her unschooled kids. So it can be really nice to learn those things, even if you don't ever go into the ALC as a volunteer or facilitator.
Thank you.
Also, it hasn't been mentioned, but just in terms of like for folks that are not ALC specific, but like a bunch of the questions that we talked about, screens and that just like general stuff about self-directed education. If you haven't discovered the Alliance for Self-Directed Education, I would definitely recommend checking out self-directed.org. There's a bunch of resources on there. There's forums if you become a member, which is free, donation based. There are forums that you can ask these kinds of questions and engage with other folks who are doing self-directed education across that spectrum, and kind of get more information and insights that way as well.
Yes, and the Alliance is started by people from different aspects of self-directed education, like democratic schools, Sudbury schools, and unschooling, in addition to Thomas being involved with the ALC model. And some ALCs will request that parents do their own education on self-directed education before they really sign up their kids, so that there isn't a lot of isn't as much hand-holding and confusion that can sometimes happen, like what's going on here and why is my kid allowed to do everything, or I don't know, or problems are less when a parent is educated about what's really the basis of all this. And I just wanted to mention this book by one of the founders of the self-directed.org of the Alliance. This is Peter Gray's book called Free to Learn, and he talks a lot about his experiences with the Sudbury School in Massachusetts, and you will see kind of real examples of how kids dive into something in an intense way and come out of it and learn something else, or all the different problems that you might imagine that really are part of the process. So I think I'm going to wrap it up. My family is ready to make noise in the house, so I'm going to say thank you to Thomas. And unfortunately, Anthony tried to get in, and he told me that I never could see him, so I couldn't add him to the call. It's really sad. He's a great guy, has a lot to offer. Another person who just is so passionate about education with no kids that wanted to start something like this and found the ALC model in Atlanta. So maybe another time we'll be able to talk with him. Thank you so much, Thomas, and thanks to Nancy, who is holding down the baby fort in the back somewhere.
Yeah.
We all do our part. Thank you, everyone who came. Cassandra left earlier, but good night, everyone.
My pleasure. Thanks, Talia. Good luck, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Kristen.
Good night. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nancy. Good night.